It was a Tuesday. One of those Tuesdays that pretends to be harmless. Sunlight creeping in through the blinds, coffee cooling on the table, the digital calendar blinking with color-coded obligations. Elon Musk sat in his Los Angeles home office, surrounded by innovation. Yet something didn't click. His fingertips hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. The cursor blinked in quiet defiance. Emails unread, meetings ignored, rockets waiting. But his mind was somewhere else. He stood up slowly, grabbed his phone, and turned it off. No explanation to his assistant. No message to his board. No tweet to the world. Just keys, jacket, and the inexplicable weight in his chest guiding him westward. The road curved through familiar hills, neighborhoods blurred past him like a half-remembered dream. Before he knew it, he was driving along the coast, the ocean wind rattling the glass of his Tesla like a whisper from another life. A train station emerged through the mist near the edge of the cliffside. Old, almost forgotten. The kind of place that doesn't show up in GPS apps, but still exists because it refuses not to. He pulled into the cracked gravel lot and stepped out. The salty air greeted him like an old friend. Inside the station, it smelled of paper tickets, damp wood, and the passing of time. A small digital board blinked one departure, Montauk, 12:25 p.m. Elon hesitated. Montauk. He'd never been. Or maybe he had. Either way, he bought a ticket and walked to the platform. A moment later, the train hissed to a stop, doors opening with the slow sigh of metal tired of moving. He boarded. The car was nearly empty. Just 3 passengers scattered across the cabin. Elon settled into a window seat halfway down. The ocean glittered outside, restless and endless. He watched it roll and rise like it had something to say. That's when she boarded. He didn't hear her footsteps or the door sliding open. He simply felt it, an atmospheric shift, like when the barometric pressure drops right before a storm. She walked slowly down the aisle, pausing just long enough to glance at each passenger. When she reached his row, she tilted her head, smiled, not overly polite, but familiar, as if they'd once laughed at the same joke long ago. Then she sat beside him. Her hair was honey gold, wild in a way that suggested she didn't mind the wind. Eyes the color of sea glass. Her nose was slightly sunburned. She carried no purse, just a tattered notebook and a single earbud hanging around her neck. Elon nodded, unsure why he suddenly felt like a boy on the first day of school. She turned toward him. "I'm Justine," she said. The name sliced through him like a violin note in silence. Justine. Why did it make his heart skip? "Elon," he replied quietly. "Cool name," she said. "Sounds like something out of a science fiction novel." He chuckled, surprised at his own amusement. "Yeah, I guess it is." They sat in silence for a few moments. Not awkward. More like the kind of silence that has already said everything important. The train rocked gently, the hum of the tracks smoothing the edges of the world. Justine looked out the window, her breath fogging a small patch of glass. Then she turned to him again. "Have we met before?" she asked. Elon blinked. "I don't think so." She nodded slowly, but didn't seem convinced. "You ever get that feeling? Like déjà vu, but it's more than that. Like your bones remember someone even if your brain doesn't." Elon looked at her, heart pounding quietly in his chest. "Yeah, I know that feeling." She smiled. "Weird." "Weird," he echoed. They talked for the rest of the ride. About places they'd never been but always wanted to see. About books they never finished but loved anyway. About silence and why some silences feel heavier than noise. He found himself saying things he hadn't told anyone in years, about childhood nights spent stargazing from rooftops, and the strange loneliness of being seen by millions, but known by none. She listened, really listened, not like an interviewer, not like a fan, like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to gain. Just curiosity, pure and weightless. At one point, Justine pulled a pen from her pocket and began sketching in her notebook. Elon peeked. "That me?" he asked, gesturing at the drawing. She smirked. "You? No, that's a robot made of spoons. But I'll do you next." And just like that, laughter spilled out of him. Unplanned, unrestrained. He couldn't remember the last time something as simple as a joke made him feel that alive. When the train slowed near a windswept platform surrounded by dunes and pine trees, she stood. "This is my stop," she said. Elon stood too, almost without meaning to. "Mine too." They walked side by side through the narrow exit, gravel crunching beneath their steps. The air was colder here, sharper. Justine looked out over the cliffside, wind tearing through her hair, and said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm looking for something I already had." He wanted to tell her he felt the same, that he didn't know why, but something in him believed she was the answer to a question he'd forgotten to ask. Instead, he said, "Would you want to keep talking?" She smiled at him, that same sideways, knowing grin. "Sure, Elon. But next time, you talk less and I draw more. Deal?" He nodded. Deal. And as they walked toward the edge of a town neither of them remembered, under a sky soft with fading light, Elon felt a strange certainty begin to bloom. He had known her before, somehow, somewhere, but now he would have to earn that knowing all over again. Hey, thanks for riding all the way through this chapter. If this story stirred something in you, hit that like button, not because it helps the algorithm, but because it tells us this story mattered. And if you want to see where Elon and Justine go from here, subscribe. You'll be part of every heartbeat, every twist, and every memory that refuses to fade. The sea was quieter that morning. Not still, never still, but more contemplative, like it, too, was holding its breath. Elon walked barefoot along the shoreline, not because he planned to, but because his shoes felt wrong somehow. Unnecessary. The sand was cold, damp, and strangely grounding. The horizon stretched endlessly before him, the soft gray of dawn pulling a veil over the edges of the world. He didn't expect to see her again. Not this soon. Not at all. And yet, there she was. Justine stood near the base of a jagged dune, sketching something in a small notebook as the wind played with her hair. She looked up the moment he approached, almost as if she'd been waiting. "You again," she said, smiling in that same off-center way that made her eyes look brighter. Elon gave a soft nod, not trusting his voice yet. "Seems we orbit the same coastline." "Or maybe," she said, tilting her head, "the coastline just wants us to run into each other." They started walking without a word. The kind of walk that doesn't require purpose or direction. The tide brushed against their ankles. The gulls circled overhead. Justine slipped her notebook back into her coat pocket and looked sideways at him. "Do you ever feel like time gets tangled?" she asked. "Like you're standing in the present, but brushing up against something that already happened? Or should have?" Elon chuckled faintly, eyes on the waves. "I build machines to measure time. I trust clocks." She smirked. "That's such a you answer. You don't even know how you it is." He turned to look at her. "What does that mean?" She shrugged, eyes playful but evasive. "Just a hunch." He studied her, something flickering behind his expression. Rational thought told him she was a stranger. But the way she walked beside him, close enough to feel familiar, distant enough to keep mystery, felt like the echo of an old comfort. They stopped at a patch of rocks where sea glass glittered like stars fallen into the sand. "I used to collect these when I was little," she said, picking up a green shard. "Told people they were pieces of alien technology. People love to believe things if you say it with confidence." "You were always like that?" he asked, curious. Justine tilted her head. "Always? You talk like you've known me a long time." Elon hesitated. "I don't know. It just feels that way." "Yeah," she said softly now. "It does." They sat there for what could have been minutes or hours, talking, laughing, falling into that strange rhythm again, the one that feels earned, not new. Elon listened to her talk about freedom, about how she feared becoming predictable, how the worst thing in the world wasn't loneliness, but routine. He, the master of calculated systems, felt disarmed by her chaos, and yet drawn to it. At one point, Justine looked him square in the eyes and said, "You try really hard not to be seen, don't you?" That hit something. Scene. She nodded. You're the kind of person who carries the weight of a room but hides it behind logic and silence. People see your name, but not you. He didn't reply. Couldn't. By the time they parted, Justine heading into a tiny bookstore tucked behind the dunes, Elon walking back toward the inn, he felt a deep dissonance humming inside his ribs. It wasn't about attraction. It was about truth, and the terrifying sense that she knew a version of him he'd forgotten. Back in his room, he tried to ground himself. Logic, facts, data. He opened his laptop and began digging. First, a simple search, Justine. Nothing. Then a deeper dive into his personal archives, photos, correspondence, logs. Still nothing. He opened old encrypted drives, ones only he knew about. Memory banks going back decades. Videos from college. Photos from early Tesla days. Email threads. Calendar entries. No Justine. He ran a voice recognition scan using a snippet he'd recorded of her voice on his phone under the guise of testing an app. It came up blank. It didn't make sense. How could someone feel so familiar and yet be completely missing from his digital history? He called his assistant. "Gabriella," he said, his voice tight, "have I ever dated someone named Justine?" There was a pause, just long enough to notice. Gabriella spoke carefully. "Not that I'm aware of, sir." You hesitated. "I'm not sure what you mean." You paused, like you were about to say something. "I just wasn't expecting the question. Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure. Would you like me to run a background scan on the name?" "No," he said quickly. "Never mind." He ended the call and stared at the wall. A feeling rose in his chest, not panic exactly, but something stranger. Something hollow, like a song half-heard or a word caught on the tip of the tongue. He rubbed his temples, tried to recall something, anything. He lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning above him. The sound it made was rhythmic, dull. His mind drifted, slowly, without consent. And then, a hallway, candlelight flickering, a silhouette brushing past him. A laugh, her laugh. He sat up suddenly. Dream or memory? He checked his phone. The voice memo he'd captured earlier was gone. Deleted? No, that wasn't possible. He never deleted anything. Nothing vanished from Elon Musk's world, unless it had help. The next morning, he woke before the sun. Still no answers. The inn's mirror reflected back a man he didn't entirely recognize, gray blue eyes heavier than usual, jaw clenched with questions. He took the notepad from the desk drawer and wrote a single word, Justine, then underlined it 3 times. He stared at it for 10 minutes. She was real. She had to be. But why did she feel so familiar? And why, in a life where nothing goes unrecorded, was she completely missing? He closed the notebook. The first crack had formed, and deep down he knew. This wasn't the beginning of something new. It was the beginning of something he had already lost. The dream came like a glitch in time. Elon was standing in front of a yellow house, weather-worn and familiar in the way dreams make the impossible feel domestic. The paint peeled in soft curls. Children's laughter echoed inside, not loud, but distant, like it had traveled through years to find him again. Justine was there. He didn't see her, but he felt her. Her voice floated through the open window, saying something about constellations. And then everything dissolved. The house caved inward like an origami collapsing. The laughter twisted into static. Elon woke with a jolt. 3:12 a.m. He sat up in bed, chest rising and falling too quickly for someone just waking. The air in the room was dense, the silence electric. There had been something in that dream. Not metaphor, not fantasy, something that belonged to him. He climbed out of bed, crossed the room, and pulled a sleek black case from a hidden drawer beneath the floorboards. It contained an old external drive, one he hadn't touched in over a decade. It wasn't connected to any cloud, any system, any grid. Not even his private server cluster had access. It was a relic from a time before fame had become its own form of surveillance. He connected it to an isolated terminal. The interface blinked awake, low-res and simple, a design he recognized instantly as his own, coded in his 20s, back when he still believed encryption was a kind of religion. For a while, the search yielded nothing unusual. Old blueprints, prototype notes, ramblings about Martian dust storms. Then a hidden directory caught his eye. It was tucked deep beneath nested files, protected by a 4-layer cipher he barely remembered creating. The name, Project Aurora. His breath caught. It didn't ring a bell, and yet it did. He cracked the encryption. The folder opened like a vault releasing long-stale air. Inside, videos, documents, neural scans, time-stamped files. Everything was stamped with the same insignia, a stylized M wrapped in a neural helix. Memora Inc. He froze. The name triggered something inside him. Not a memory, a vibration, like standing too close to a frequency only dogs were meant to hear. He opened the first video. It was grainy, but clear enough. There he was, Elon, sitting in a reclined chair, sensors affixed to his temples. His expression wasn't confused or scared. It was numb, resigned. On the screen's corner, a date, March 17th, 2022. A woman's voice off camera asked gently, "Are you ready to proceed with the erasure of Subject J?" Elon on the screen gave a single nod. A new window opened beside the video, an interface overlay showing a memory map. Nodes blinked red as they were marked for deletion. Beside each one, a brief description. First kiss, rooftop under meteor shower. Laughter at failed souffle. Argument over trust. Forgiveness, post-storm embrace. Final goodbye, airport terminal. Each memory labeled, targeted, erased. He closed the video, hands trembling. He hadn't found Justine again. He had erased her. And now, she had reappeared, without memory, without context, but with a presence so strong it pierced the veil of whatever chemical fog Memora had used to make her disappear. He opened a second video. This time, Justine was in the chair. Her hair was tied back. She looked thinner. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. The timestamp was dated just one day after his. The voice asked the same question. "Are you ready to proceed with the erasure of Subject E?" Justine didn't nod. She whispered, "Do I have to forget all of it?" The technician hesitated. "That's the package you signed for." Justine closed her eyes. "Okay." The footage ended. Elon sat back in a chair, spine rigid. The room felt too small, his skin too tight. 1,000 thoughts screamed at once, each one colliding with the next. Why had they done it? Why had he agreed to it? What had hurt so deeply that he'd chosen oblivion over memory? He opened a text document titled Final Consent EM. It was short, blunt, emotionless. I, Elon Musk, consent to the permanent removal of memory clusters associated with Subject J, in accordance with Memora Incorporated's Aurora protocol. I acknowledge that retrieval is not possible. I acknowledge this is irreversible. No emotion, no hesitation. But that was the Elon of then. A man on the edge, perhaps. Grieving, angry, desperate to unfeel. Now, he was watching the echo of his own annihilation. And it shook him. He stood, pacing the room. Justine wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was the crater left behind by a choice he no longer remembered making. And now she was back. And so was he, awakening piece by piece, not through recovery, but through presence. He stared at the screen again. The folder was full of partial memory scans, digital impressions of moments, dreams, touches, phrases. Some were scrambled, distorted by the deletion process. Others were intact. There was one audio file labeled Lullaby Kitchen. He played it. Justine's voice, soft and off-key, sang the opening lines of a lullaby in French. He could hear himself in the background laughing. That laugh was unrecognizable to him now. Lighter, younger. It hit him then, not as logic but as grief. In trying to erase the pain, he had erased the joy too. What else had he deleted? What corners of himself had collapsed because he thought removing Justine meant restoring balance? He returned to the folder. At the bottom, there was one final file. For future Elon, "Do not open unless absolutely necessary." It was a message addressed to himself. His heart pounded. He clicked. A video began to play. Elon stared into the camera, older than in the earlier footage. Not the man who had erased everything, but one who had already started to regret it. "If you're watching this," the video Elon said, "then something's broken through." A pause. "You were warned. About the cost of forgetting. About the trauma it buries but never removes. You didn't believe you'd ever want to remember. You said she was fire and silence. That she made you feel too much." A beat. "But I think maybe that was the point. Maybe feeling too much is better than feeling nothing." He leaned closer to the camera. "Don't run from her again. If she came back to you, it's for a reason." The video ended. Elon sat there, breath ragged, the glow of the screen pulsing against his skin. The paradox was complete. In trying to forget Justine, he had amputated the part of himself that made him most human. And now that she'd returned, unannounced, unremembered, he wasn't sure whether to run from the pain again, or finally face what he once chose to lose. It began subtly, like shadows creeping under a locked door. At first, Elon thought he was daydreaming. He would glance up from a blueprint or a browser tab and see the flicker of a memory that didn't belong to the present, like a half-formed photograph superimposed over reality. A blurred figure in the corner of his kitchen, a flash of color and motion. A laugh. A voice. Justine's voice. But it wasn't her voice now, it was her voice then. Singing, terribly off-key, with wild enthusiasm and no sense of rhythm. In his memory, she stood barefoot on the tile, using a wooden spoon as a microphone. The tune was some old French lullaby she never quite remembered the lyrics to. Elon had always rolled his eyes and smiled when she sang it, pretending to be annoyed. But deep down, he loved that song. Loved that she kept singing it wrong. The memory pulled him like undertow. One moment, he was sitting in his home office. The next, he was there in the kitchen of a house that no longer existed in his current life. The walls were yellow, the light golden. A pot was boiling over, and the air smelled of burnt garlic. Justine was mid-note, waving her spoon with comedic drama. Elon stood behind the counter, laughing so hard he had to put down the schematic he was working on. She looked at him, triumphantly off-pitch, and bowed. He clapped sarcastically. Then, snap. The moment collapsed like ash in the wind. Back in his chair, Elon blinked hard. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory. A real one. He opened the Memora Incorporated folder again, scrolling past the video files until he found a document labeled Archive 5B Deletion Index Summary. He opened it. A list populated on the screen, stark and emotionless. First laugh, kitchen singing off-key. Storm night, power outage, candles, confession. Garage failure, prototype explosion, mutual laughter. Fight in Mexico, misunderstanding, walkout. Park bench silence, 43 minutes, no words. Last hug, Terminal 3, March 2022. Each one time stamped. Each one marked, erased, Aurora Protocol. Elon stared at the list, his eyes scanning the phrases like old wounds reopening. His fingers hovered above the trackpad, unable to move. He remembered the prototype explosion. It had been a late night. They were building a scale model of a propulsion unit in the garage of a rented house in Pasadena. Elon had miscalculated the amperage. The device had sparked violently and burst, covering both of them in fine black dust. Justine had doubled over laughing, coughing through the smoke. He remembered the look on her face, delighted, messy, alive. The joy of it crushed him now. He hadn't known what he was losing at the time he signed those papers. He thought he was erasing pain. But pain, he realized now, was braided into joy. One didn't exist without the other. The memories kept coming. A sudden flash while he brushed his teeth, Justine asleep on the couch, book in hand, the dog curled beside her. He could smell the citrus shampoo in her hair. He could feel the quiet hum of belonging. Another vision hit him in an elevator, a fragment of the storm night. They had lost power during a thunderstorm, and instead of panicking, Justine had lit candles and turned it into a game. "We're off the grid now," she said, eyes glowing in the flicker. They had made shadow puppets on the wall. That night, she told him something raw, something vulnerable. But now he couldn't remember what it was, only that it mattered. He paced his study, hands shaking. The truth was unbearable. She wasn't pretending not to remember him. She truly didn't know him. She had erased him too. They had both chosen this. Together or separately, he didn't yet know. But the symmetry made the loss deeper. It wasn't just that she'd been stolen from him. He had stolen himself from her too. He reopened one of the videos, the one labeled Final Session Jam. Justine's face filled the screen. She looked tired. Her fingers nervously twisted the cord of her hoodie. "I want this," she said. "I know it sounds cowardly, but I don't know how else to move forward." The technician asked, "Are you sure you wish to proceed with full partner erasure?" Justine hesitated. A long pause. Then softly she nodded. He was everything, but sometimes too much everything. The screen went black. Elon sat there for a long time. He remembered that version of himself, hungry, brilliant, obsessed. She had called him a supernova once. Beautiful but destructive. Maybe she wasn't wrong, but they had loved. That much was undeniable. And love, in its truest form, left a mark no machine could ever fully wipe away. He looked back at the deletion list, this time whispering each entry aloud, as if speaking them could resurrect what was lost. The words tasted like dust and honey. First laugh. Storm night. Garage failure. Fight in Mexico. Park bench silence. Last hug. Every line was a blade. Not because it described an event, but because he now knew what he'd traded for emotional anesthesia. He closed the laptop slowly, like sealing a coffin, then walked to the window and stared out at the Los Angeles skyline, where the city blinked and breathed without him. The world kept spinning, but his axis had shifted. The idea that forgetting could be healing now felt like a grotesque misunderstanding of what it meant to be alive. Memory was pain, yes, but it was also depth, color, reason. A life without memory wasn't peace, it was absence. He turned from the glass and whispered, to no one in particular, "What have we done?" Elon had no roadmap, no protocol, no assurance of safety, only a need, raw, burning, irrepressible. He couldn't unsee the memories, couldn't ignore how they clawed their way back from the void with every passing hour. Fragments once buried were beginning to stitch themselves together like rebellious neurons reactivating. And yet, too much was missing. The edges didn't align. The emotions were loud, but the context was gone. His identity felt incomplete, like a song missing its chorus. So he turned to the only person who might understand what had been done to him. Harland. Years ago, Harlan Price had been one of the lead neurotech engineers at Memora Incorporated, a quiet genius who designed much of the core infrastructure for Project Aurora. But he had left under disgrace, accused of manipulating client data, experimenting with illegal memory restorations, and accessing emotional maps without consent. Memora erased him from their public records. But Elon had always kept a mental tab on the ghosts in the system. And Harlan was the most vital of them all. He found him in a cluttered apartment above an old bookstore in San Francisco, surrounded by rusting servers and half-disassembled cortical scanners. Harlan was older now, 60 maybe more. His dark skin shimmered with health, but his eyes were tired. Thoughtful, too thoughtful. The kind of man who had seen the mind unravel one too many times. "Elon Musk," he said, standing still at the doorway. "Never thought you'd come knocking on my ruin." "I need your help," Elon said. "Help?" Harlan echoed, smiling sadly. "That's a dangerous word in this line of work." They sat amid blinking consoles and the low hum of forgotten tech. Harlan served tea in mismatched mugs and listened quietly as Elon told him everything. Justine, the beach, the dreams, the files, the truth. When Elon finished, Harlan remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You want to reverse an Aurora-class deletion. That's a gamble even the dev team wouldn't touch." "I don't care," Elon said. "I need to get it back. All of it." Harlan looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Why? For closure? For pain? You do realize that memory isn't just a record, it's infrastructure. Pull the wrong beam, the whole building falls. I need to know who I was with her, and why I gave it up. If I don't understand that, I don't know who I am now. Harlan nodded slowly, then rose and began digging through a drawer. He pulled out a small silver headset, webbed with microfilaments and neural nodes. "This isn't Memoritech," he said. "It's mine. It doesn't restore memory. It reaches for it. You'll be inside your own neural dust, chasing shadows that may not want to be caught." "I'm ready." "You're not," Harlan said, "but we never are." The headset went on with a cool hiss. The room dimmed. Harlan dimmed. The world tilted and then folded. Elon blinked. He was standing inside a burning library. The air was thick with smoke and paper ash. Towering bookshelves collapsed like dominoes, their spines glowing red as fire licked upward. He ran, not from the fire, but toward it. He could hear laughter somewhere ahead. Justine's laughter. He turned a corner and saw her dancing in the middle of the inferno, untouched, barefoot, twirling with her arms raised like a child. She smiled at him, but before he could reach her, the floor gave out. He fell through memory like water. Next, a dark sky. Not Earth's sky, but some distant atmosphere, violet and weightless. They floated together, tethered by nothing but each other's touch. Justine wore a look of pure peace. Elon held her waist as they spun midair. Music played from nowhere, a soft piano that he somehow recognized. "Where are we?" he asked. "A place you once promised me," she said. And then she was gone. He fell again, into a childhood street, a flash of blue speeding past him. The bicycle. He remembered that bicycle. It was hers. She had found it at a flea market and painted it herself, bright blue with yellow handle grips. She rode it like she was defying every expectation the world had ever set on her. He chased after it now, shouting her name, Justine. The bike turned a corner. He followed, but when he got there, it was gone. Only a lone sunflower lay in the street. Back in the lab, Harlan's monitors blinked red. Neural wave spikes. Unstable pattern formations. Cortical desync in progress. Inside the system, Elon kept running. Memories bled into one another. He saw versions of himself, laughing, shouting, kissing her, breaking down, building rockets, sleeping in server rooms, hugging her at airports. Her face was everywhere, but always just out of reach. He came to a field, a wide, open field under a white sky. Justine stood far away, her back to him. He called out. She didn't turn. He ran to her. Each step felt heavier. The world grew softer, blurrier. The field distorted, pulling apart like a glitch. Finally, he reached her. She turned. Her face flickered, older, younger, angry, joyful, all at once. Then it stabilized. "Elon," she said. His breath caught. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. "I had to come back," he said. "I couldn't live without knowing, without feeling it." Her eyes softened. She stepped closer, lifting a hand to his cheek. "You did love me." "I still do." And then she vanished. Everything went white. Elon gasped as the headset disengaged. The world reassembled slowly. Harlan's lab, the blinking monitors, the teacup now cold beside him. He collapsed against the chair, sweat running down his temple. Harlan watched him silently. "Did you find her?" he asked. "I lost her," Elon said. "Sometimes that's how we find the truth." Elon stared ahead, hollow but awake. For the first time, he felt the cost of forgetting not as a wound, but as a fracture running through time itself. He had run into the void, and the void had whispered back. The mind was not sanctuary. It was a labyrinth, and within it, memory did not behave like a linear record, but like a landscape bending under emotional gravity. Elon was beginning to learn this the hard way. Once Harlan's device had pulled him fully into the deep layers of subconscious reconstruction, reality became malleable. Events bled together. Time curled inward. Logic frayed at the edges. But amid the chaos, Justine was there. Or rather, a version of her. Memory Justine. Not bound by chronology, not entirely whole, but her. laughing, crying, radiant, furious, more vivid than anything his waking self had experienced in years. They were running now. Not through streets or corridors, but through memory itself, past towering reels of light filled with laughter, through rooms of fog where voices echoed like birds in empty halls. And behind them came the erasers, shapeless, fluid entities designed by Memra, incorporated to scrub corrupted recollections during the Aurora procedure. They floated in, silent but relentless, dissolving everything they touched into white noise and static. Elon had seen them before, briefly, in earlier dives. But now they were hunting. They're trying to complete the deletion. Justine gasped beside him, barefoot, hair whipping around her face. "We're not supposed to be here." "I'm not letting them take you again," Elon said, grabbing her hand and pulling her through a shimmering curtain of memory. On the other side, they landed in a familiar room, their old living room. The walls were soft blue, the furniture mismatched and lived in. A small record player spun in the corner, playing a scratchy jazz tune. And in the center, two people danced barefoot on a faded rug, younger versions of themselves. Elon stared. It was one of the last nights before the split. No fights, no drama, just them. A bottle of red wine half finished on the table, socks abandoned in a trail toward the couch, and the simple rhythm of feet on floor, bodies swaying in time. "God," Justine whispered, "I forgot this." The past Elon leaned forward and kissed past Justine's temple. She smiled without opening her eyes. Present Elon felt his throat tighten. He reached out to touch the air, but it rippled like disturbed water. Then the floor began to vanish. First the edges, then the rug, then the shadows around their dancing feet. "No!" Elon shouted. The erasers had found them. They spilled in from the ceiling like black ink spreading underwater, faceless and mechanical, drawing the color out of the scene. The past versions of themselves froze, then began to disintegrate, limb by limb, memory by memory. Justine clung to Elon, screaming, "I don't want to disappear again." Her voice fractured the space. The memory shook. The music warped into static. Elon turned, adrenaline and anguish colliding. He couldn't lose her again. Not even here. Not even if it was only mental reconstruction. He closed his eyes and reached deeper. Not for a shared memory. For one that belonged only to him. One so buried even the erasers couldn't trace it. And in an instant, they fell through space again. When they landed, they were surrounded by sun. It was a field, wild, golden, endless. The sky was blindingly blue, the air dry and rich with the scent of wild grass. In the distance, two boys ran barefoot, one laughing wildly, the other chasing him with a stick shaped like a sword. Elon stared at them. It was him and his younger brother, Kimball. This was northern Pretoria. The farm. The place they used to escape to when the world was too loud. A place untouched by Justine, by rockets, by Memra, by pain. A pure memory. Unshared. The boys vanished over a hill, leaving Elon and Justine alone under the South African sun. She turned to him, brushing hair from her face. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes confused. "Where are we?" "My childhood," he said, breathless. "No one can reach us here." She looked around, taking it in, nostalgic for something she'd never seen. "It's beautiful." He nodded. They sat in the grass. For a while, the wind was the only sound. Then she asked the question, "Why did you want to erase me?" Elon stiffened. Her voice wasn't accusing, just deeply wounded, curious in most intimate way. He didn't answer right away. The words formed, then dissolved. He looked at her, the freckles on her nose, the green in her eyes, the way her lips trembled without tears. "I don't know," he finally said. "That's not true." He exhaled hard. "I thought it was the only way to stop hurting." "Did it work?" He shook his head. Justine reached out and took his hand. "Pain isn't the enemy, Elon. Erasure is." He looked at her hand in his, so real, so warm, and then at the golden field around them, shimmering with the innocence of a forgotten summer. "If I lose this memory," he said, "I lose who I am." "Then don't lose it," she said. Hide me here." He stared at her. "You trust me with that? You trusted me once, before the world and the pain and the silence. I want to trust you again." A gust of wind passed through them. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Stay." When he opened them again, she was gone, but the warmth of her hand remained. And somewhere far above, beyond the child's laughter, beyond the golden light, and the digital pulse of Harlan's machine, Elon Musk cried. Not for what he had lost, but for what he had chosen to forget. The world reassembled itself slowly, like a jigsaw puzzle submerged underwater. Elon opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled sterile, faintly metallic, as though charged with static. A soft beeping, irregular and almost musical, punctuated the silence. "Elon," a voice said, steady and measured. He turned his head. Harlan was sitting nearby, a tablet resting on his lap, glasses perched low on his nose. His gaze was calm, but there was tension beneath the surface, like a dam holding back too much water. "You're back," Harlan continued. "Sort of." Elon blinked, his lips dry. He tried to speak, but the words clung to the inside of his throat. "What happened?" he croaked. "You dove deep," Harlan said. "Too deep. I managed to bring you out, but I could only salvage pieces. You weren't just lost in a memory loop, you were rewriting things on the fly. Dream logic mixed with actual fragments. Dangerous stuff." Elon sat up slowly. His head pulsed with a strange rhythm, like the ticking of an unfamiliar clock. His muscles were stiff, his mouth tasted like tin, and his mind was a museum of shattered exhibits. "I saw her," he whispered. "Justine. In Africa. We were hiding." Harlan nodded. "Some of it was real. Most wasn't. You buried her in a childhood memory to protect her, Elon. That's symbolic, not structural. You've got shards, not mirrors." Elon didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the small leather-bound notebook lying beside the bed. He opened it to the first blank page and began writing. Names, images, places, whatever surfaced. Blue bike, planet ballroom, her voice in the shower, rain on the roof, smell of lavender, snow once her hands were cold. The words came disjointed, like spilled beads from a broken necklace. His handwriting was erratic. Some sentences were crossed out almost immediately, as if his mind revolted against them. "Dates don't match," he muttered, flipping back and forth. "There's a beach memory set in 1998, but she's wearing a smartwatch. That tech didn't exist back then. And this, the quiet diner. I've never been to a place by that name, but I know the salt shakers. I know them like I know my bones." Harlan exhaled deeply. That's what happens when memory collapses into association. You're chasing meaning across a burning bridge. But Elon wasn't listening anymore. Later that afternoon, he left the clinic under a low gray sky. The streets of Los Angeles looked different, too bright, too fake. Or maybe he was the one now out of phase, like a ghost in a place he used to live. He wandered without direction, notebook in hand, letting intuition guide his feet. A small bell rang overhead as he pushed open the door to a cafe tucked between two bookstores. He'd never seen it before. Or maybe he had. Memory now existed in a half-state, alive, yet not reliable. He stepped inside. The smell of baked cinnamon and bergamot hit him immediately. Wooden floors creaked underfoot. Jazz played softly from an old speaker in the corner. There were few customers, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a young woman sketching. And her. Justine sat by the window. Alone. She was stirring sugar into a cup of tea with an absent rhythm, like someone listening to a silent song. Her hair caught the late light pouring through the glass, glowing faintly golden. She was reading a book. He couldn't see the title, but she wasn't really reading. Her gaze was somewhere else. Distant. Dreaming. Elon froze. 1,000 voices screamed inside him. He wanted to run. He wanted to speak. He wanted to remember the precise temperature of her hands. He stepped closer. She looked up. Their eyes met. Time stuttered. It was not recognition, not fully. Her brows didn't lift. Her mouth didn't form a name, but her body responded. A slight tilt of the head, a pause, the tiniest widening of the eyes, and the spoon in her hand paused mid-stir like a skipped heartbeat. Elon's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Instead, he nodded once, just barely. A gesture of familiarity without claim. Justine smiled. It was the same crooked smile she gave him when they used to cook together. The one she wore after burning the rice, or dropping a wine glass, or kissing him too hard and laughing. And then she went back to her tea. Not cold, not distant, just unfinished. As if their story had once existed, but the final pages were missing. Elon sat 2 tables away. He ordered nothing. He didn't speak. He simply watched her finish her tea, close her book, and walk away. As she passed, her eyes brushed against his again. "Nice notebook," she said softly. And then she was gone. The bell rang behind her. Elon opened the notebook and wrote. She stirs with her left hand. Her eye twitches when she's unsure. Her footsteps are still musical. She doesn't remember me, but I remember her dance. When he stepped outside, it had started to rain, a quiet, misty kind of rain. It wet his face, his hair, his shoulders. But he didn't mind. Not anymore. Something had returned. Not enough, but something. And that was more than he'd had in years. The letter sat on his desk for 3 nights. Its presence was like a pulse, constant and quiet, pressing at his thoughts with a rhythm only he could feel. Elon rewrote it 12 times. First with logic, then with poetry, then stripped of both. What remained was something unarmored, fragile in its honesty. Not a confession, not a plea, just a memory. One he couldn't hold alone anymore. It began simply, "Dear Justine, you won't remember this, but one day you laughed so hard, you dropped an entire glass beaker. A rat had chewed through a power cable and set off a chain reaction in the lab. Alarms, lights, chaos. I panicked. You laughed. You laughed until your eyes teared up and you hiccuped like a child. I'd never seen someone so beautiful in disarray." He paused when he wrote that part. The word beautiful felt inadequate, yet anything more ornate would have betrayed the rawness he was chasing. That day, I realized something I didn't say out loud. You made the noise in my head stop. Just by being there. The equations, the deadlines, the responsibility, they dulled when you smiled. I don't remember everything, but I know enough now to feel what I've lost. What we lost. I signed away parts of myself to stay functional. You must have too. But maybe, just maybe, if you're reading this, it means you're wondering too. He didn't sign the letter. Somehow, that felt important. The morning was overcast. Not the cinematic kind, but dull and uninspiring. Gray that pressed down on the skin like static. Elon walked to the cafe with the envelope tucked in his jacket, fingers gripping it tightly, as if it might float away. Inside, Justine sat by the window again. Same table. Same tea. She always stirred counterclockwise. Elon had noticed that the first day, and now again he caught it, her eyes not on the tea, but on the motion, as if unsure why it comforted her. He walked past the glass slowly, heart hammering. When he opened the door, the familiar chime startled them both. Justine looked up, her expression calm, friendly. Not recognition, just polite interest. He smiled and nodded, walking toward the counter, as if just another customer. She returned to her tea, unaware that he was carrying the weight of the past in a single folded page. He didn't speak to her. He couldn't. Instead, after getting a coffee he wouldn't drink, he sat at a table near the window. He glanced at her, studying the curve of her fingers on the cup, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while reading. That small motion, he remembered it. It was hers. The envelope felt like it was burning in his pocket. He pulled it out gently, looked at it one last time. Then, standing slowly, he walked to her table. She didn't notice. She was absorbed in her book. Or perhaps pretending to be. Maybe she felt something too, and didn't know what to name it. He placed the envelope softly beside her teacup. No words, just a touch of paper on wood. Then he turned and walked away. Outside, he stood beneath the awning, watching the drizzle begin. Soft, uncertain rain. He couldn't bring himself to leave. Something in him wanted to see if she'd open it. Through the fog glass, he saw her look up. Her gaze fell on the envelope. She tilted her head, curious. Her hand hovered over it, fingertips grazing the edge, but not lifting it. A pause. She looked out the window, straight at him. Their eyes locked, and something, he couldn't name it, passed between them. A flicker, a warmth, or a shadow of one. Her lips parted slightly, as if remembering the ghost of a name. He didn't move. Neither did she. Then, almost shyly, she reached for the envelope. Her fingers curled around it. She turned it over. No name, no address, just silence and possibility. Back in his car, Elon didn't start the engine. He sat with his hands on the wheel, staring ahead at nothing. The rain began to pick up, dotting the windshield with tiny blurs. He thought about memory, about choice, about how love, when stripped of its timeline, still leaves an imprint in the bones. Something cellular. You can forget the moment, but your body remembers the heat of someone's hand, the pitch of their laughter, the color of the sky, when they said your name, like it mattered. He exhaled slowly, forehead resting against the steering wheel. In the cafe, Justine unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the page. They lingered. Lines formed between her brows. She looked up again, but he was gone. Still, she read to the end. When she reached the sentence about the rat and the beaker, she laughed. A real small, involuntary laugh. She didn't know why, but something about it felt warm. She held the paper to her chest for a moment, then tucked it gently into her bag. Outside, the rain whispered secrets to the city. And somewhere in two separate hearts, an old song began again, quiet, hesitant, waiting for its melody. The sun had long dipped below the Los Angeles skyline, leaving Elon's office bathed in the soft glow of ambient lamps and muted screens. The evening hush settled like dust in the corners of the room. Elon sat at his desk, surrounded by equations half-solved, design mock-ups of orbital modules, and unread messages that blinked quietly like forgotten promises. But tonight, none of it mattered. His mind, ever tangled with the stars and steel, was somewhere else entirely, tracing every word he had written in that letter, every moment he thought about turning back to retrieve it. And then a knock. Not the usual tap of an assistant or security check-in. It was softer, hesitant, almost afraid to exist. He turned. Standing there was Justine. Her hair was a little windswept, cheeks flushed as if she had walked quickly but didn't want to seem rushed. She held nothing in her hands, but her fingers twitched, as if they still remembered the envelope she had folded and unfolded for hours. "Elon," she said, her voice quieter than he remembered, yet somehow still the same. "Can I come in?" He stood. "Yes, of course." She stepped in, eyes scanning the room like she was looking for some version of him she might remember. "I read the letter," she said. I don't remember those things. Not exactly. But something about it." Her voice trailed off, and she clutched her elbows as if bracing for some kind of impact. "I cried. Not because I remembered, but because it felt like I should. Like something inside me was waking up." Elon stayed silent. His heart pounded, and not in the mechanical way it had during launches or quarterly reports. This was different, erratic, warm, raw. She met his eyes. "There's a version of me in that letter that laughed with you in a kitchen, who danced barefoot, who made you forget pressure, even for a moment. I don't remember being her, Elon, but I miss her. And I think maybe I miss you too." He didn't know what to say. She filled the silence for him. "Does that make sense?" He nodded, finally letting out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "More than you know." A stillness followed, not awkward but suspended, like the pause in a symphony when the audience doesn't dare to breathe. "I'm not here to blame you," she added. "I agreed to the procedure. I signed it too. We both erased each other. That's not something we can undo completely." "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking to go back. He paused, searching for the right shape to give his feelings. "I think part of me hoped the pain of forgetting would be easier than the pain of remembering." She smiled, sad but open. "And is it?" He shook his head. Not even close. She moved closer now, almost shy. I've been thinking about what you wrote. About the rat chewing the wire, about the rainstorm in Mexico, and how you thought I made you forget the pressure of being a genius. That's not small, Elon. That's something sacred. Even if I don't remember it, I feel it now. He looked at her then, really looked, and realized how much of her had remained untouched by deletion. The tilt of her smile, the way her eyebrow arched when she said something vulnerable, the slight twitch in her left eye when she tried not to cry. Echoes of familiarity in a body that had forgotten him. There's still a gap, he admitted. A canyon between what we were and what we are. I'm afraid of rebuilding on broken ground. Justine tilted her head. Maybe we don't have to rebuild. Maybe we start something new. Not as who we were, but as who we are now. He swallowed. That might hurt too. She nodded. Probably will. Do you want to try again? She asked, her voice steady now, her hands no longer fidgeting. He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because the weight of everything, the risks, the hope, the ghosts, pressed against his chest like gravity. Yes, he said finally, his voice quieter than hers, but no less sure. Even knowing it might hurt again. Yes. For the first time in what felt like years, he smiled without calculation. She smiled back, and in that instant, they weren't two people trying to reclaim what they'd lost. They were two people choosing willingly to walk into something unknown. Not a reboot, not a restoration, but a rebirth. They didn't hug, didn't kiss, no dramatic music or sudden embrace. Instead, they sat, across from each other, in the middle of a room filled with plans for Mars and contracts worth billions, and they spoke about books, about music, about why chamomile tea always tastes like regret, and why people whisper when they mean something. And Elon thought, maybe this is what memory really is. Not the perfect recall of a moment, but the choice to believe in someone again anyway. As the night deepened and their laughter slowly returned, awkward and genuine, the stars outside the window blinked back at him. And for once, he didn't look up with the hunger of a man chasing escape. He looked up, smiled, and stayed right where he was. The cafe had not changed. That was the first thing Elon noticed. The same cracked tile near the entrance that everyone sidestepped without thinking. The same ivy winding down from the hanging pot over the cash register. The same slight hiss of the espresso machine, like a distant ocean wave. Even the same barista, a wiry man with too much gel in his hair and a permanent smudge of coffee grounds on his apron, nodded at him with vague recognition, though clearly unsure why. But today, it felt like a different planet. Justine arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. As if the universe had recalibrated itself to make room for this fragile, uncertain encounter. She wore a pale green blouse that caught the sunlight when she stepped inside, her hair swept back loosely behind one ear, her face lit by a half-smile that trembled with the effort of holding still. Elon stood awkwardly, unsure whether to reach for a hug or a handshake or just wave like a nervous teenager. They ended up hugging, briefly, like an echo of something they weren't sure had ever happened. I picked the same table, she said, gesturing to the corner spot where she'd once sat reading the letter. The letter he almost didn't write. I noticed, Elon replied, pulling out her chair before sitting across from her. Though I think the salt shaker has moved. She laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was real, and for a moment they both relaxed. Menus came and went without much attention. They ordered what they always used to without meaning to, as if their hands remembered habits their minds did not. Elon asked for chamomile tea, even though he'd recently switched to oolong. Justine ordered the lentil soup, wrinkled her nose, and said, I forgot I used to like this. They sat in silence for a minute, sipping water, adjusting napkins, letting the air settle. Then Justine leaned forward, her eyes searching. Do you miss them? The memories? Elon didn't answer right away. He looked out the window where the street hummed with ordinary life, a boy bouncing a red ball, an old woman pushing a shopping cart full of tulips, a dog tugging on its leash to chase a pigeon. I miss something, he said eventually, but I don't know what it's called. Like a song I once knew how to hum, but forgot the first note. Justine nodded slowly, her green eyes flickering with emotion. "I sometimes feel like I'm walking through someone else's house. Everything is in its place, but nothing feels like mine." Elon smiled, a little sad, a little relieved. That's exactly it. Their meals arrived. They thanked the waiter, picked up their spoons. At first, they ate quietly. But then Justine chuckled at the way Elon blew on his soup, an exaggerated puff, like a dragon too tired to breathe fire. He laughed back, pointing out how she still stirred her tea counterclockwise, always with 3 circles before sipping. "These are things we never tried to remember," he said. "They just stayed." "Muscle memory of the heart," she replied. And just like that, the weight began to lift. They talked not about the past, but about the present, the odd dreams Elon had since the reversal, the book Justine was trying to write but couldn't quite finish, a stray cat that had adopted her porch as its throne. He told her about Harland and the lab and the warnings, how it had all felt like diving blind into his own mind. She told him she'd found a stack of old journals, but couldn't bring herself to read them. "It's like I'm afraid of meeting someone I used to be," she whispered. "Maybe that's okay," Elon said gently. "Maybe we're not supposed to go back." Their eyes met again, and this time, there was no past weighing between them. Just a table, a bowl of soup, a cooling cup of tea, and the quiet, strange joy of rebuilding something that once had no name. As the sun shifted, casting golden ribbons across the cafe floor, Justine reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. She slid it across the table. "I've been writing things down, things I feel instead of remember. Maybe you want to add yours." Elon opened the notebook. The first page read, "Not memories, echoes." He looked up, moved beyond words. "You want to build something new, don't you?" Justine's expression softened. "Only if you want to build it too. No timelines, no expectations, just whatever this is now." He sat back, hands on the notebook, and nodded. "I think this might be the first date I've ever had where I don't feel like I need to impress anyone." She grinned. "Don't get comfortable. I'm still judging your soup etiquette." They lingered after the plates were cleared. The cafe grew quieter. A breeze rustled the napkins, and a beam of light caught in her hair. Elon thought of how many times he must have seen her like that before, and how strange it was that this moment felt more vivid than any memory. When they finally stepped outside, the day was soft with spring. Justine pulled her cardigan around her shoulders. Elon offered his arm, not out of habit, but because he wanted to. They walked without destination, slowly, like people who weren't trying to get anywhere fast. Just learning again how to walk beside each other. No promises, no need for them. Only the shared rhythm of 2 souls daring to meet again, not in the pages of history, but in the moment they were now brave enough to call real. And somewhere in the space between what they had been and what they might become, the possibility of something beautiful waited. Not a restoration, a rebirth. The days that followed their second first lunch unfolded like a page slowly turning in the breeze, soft, deliberate, almost imperceptible. Elon returned to his work, but not fully. There was a corner of his mind now reserved for Justine, a quiet space where her voice sometimes echoed, or where the scent of her hair would interrupt his train of thought without warning. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something else, something more persistent, a flicker of time that refused to be extinguished. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, having dreamt of her laughing beside him in a vineyard they had never visited. In the dream, she wore a yellow sundress. She called his name and turned to run between the rows of vines, her laughter trailing behind her like wind through leaves. And yet, when he tried to recall such a day, his memory failed him. But the warmth remained. Justine, too, felt the hauntings. One morning, she stood frozen in a grocery aisle, hand trembling over a jar of raspberry preserves. The radio above played an old jazz number, Blue in Green. Without knowing why, tears welled in her eyes. She had never liked jazz, or so she thought, but that song felt like a thread being pulled from somewhere deep. That afternoon, she called Elon. "There's a melody in my head," she said. "It made me cry." but I don't know why." Elon, quiet on the other end, whispered, "That was your favorite song. You made me play it on repeat in the garage while you painted the ceiling white and called it your canvas of reinvention." There was silence on the line, then laughter. "I must have had great taste," she said softly. They began chasing the fragments together, not obsessively, but curiously, like two archaeologists exploring ruins that felt strangely like home. They would drive to places neither of them remembered visiting, yet sometimes one would pause and say something that chilled the other. It happened most vividly on a cloudy Tuesday. Elon took Justine to a small cottage north of the city. He had bought it years ago, unsure why he kept it. The walls had been repainted, the furniture replaced, but the bones of the place still held secrets. They walked slowly through the narrow hallway, the floor creaking beneath their steps. Justine ran her hand along the edge of a bookshelf. "This place feels like it used to be louder," she murmured. "Louder. Kids. Laughter. Music. Mess. Love." They reached the bedroom. She stood at the threshold, then turned abruptly to the corner of the room. "Help me move this rug," she said. Elon knelt beside her. Together they pulled it back, revealing a small trapdoor in the wooden floor. "You knew this was here?" he asked. Justine nodded, eyes wide. "There's a hiding spot underneath. We used to sneak chocolates here when the kids were asleep. You said it was the only place they couldn't find them." Elon blinked. "Yes, that's exactly right." He stared at her, at the delicate certainty in her face. She hadn't remembered the name of the cafe where they first met. But this obscure, tender sliver of their past had survived somehow. "How do you know that?" he asked. "I don't," she replied, voice trembling. "It just came to me, like muscle memory, like I was walking into a place my heart never left." Elon sat back on his heels, dazed. "Maybe some things are too strong to be erased." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe we never really forget the people who held us when we fell apart." That night, they didn't speak much, but the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was full, pregnant with things they didn't need to say aloud. A kind of sacred hush. Later, back in his home, Elon opened one of the old notebooks he had been keeping since waking from a mental collapse. The pages were filled with scribbles, mismatched dates, names, diagrams, and dreams. But on the last page, he wrote only one sentence: "Some memories fight to be remembered. Others choose you." As time passed, they both began encountering more of these flickers, small, spontaneous restorations of something that had once felt lost forever. A note Justine found in an old book in her apartment, written in her own handwriting, addressed to future Elon, telling him not to forget the way her laugh sounded when she spilled wine on herself. Neither of them remembered writing it, but there it was. One evening, as they sat on the patio of that same cafe where it had all rekindled, Justine said, "It's like we're living with ghosts of ourselves, but friendly ones. Ones that want to help us rebuild." Elon stirred his coffee. "I used to think everything was binary, lost or found, broken or whole. But now, maybe it's more like spectrum. Maybe we're just shifting into new shapes of who we were." She reached across the table, touching his hand. "Do you ever worry we're just chasing illusions?" He met her gaze. "Yes, but I'd rather chase illusions with you than certainty alone." She smiled, and there was something in that smile, not recognition, but resonance. Like a song hummed without lyrics, but still understood. And as they sat there, the world moved on around them. Cars passed, people talked. Rain began to patter lightly on the awning, but within their shared stillness, something began to bloom again. Not the same love, but not entirely new. Something in between, a memory yet to be made. The building looked more like a museum than a lab. Sleek marble floors, glass walls that reflected the sky like pools of memory, and soft, ambient lighting that seemed to hum with unsaid thoughts. Elon and Justine stood at the entrance of Memora Incorporated, side by side, uncertain whether they were about to reclaim something precious or shatter what they'd only just begun to rebuild. It had been Justine's idea. After days of scattered recollections and emotional déjà vus, after the moment with the trapdoor and the sweets, she had said, maybe we need to understand why some things stayed. Elon hadn't answered right away. He had simply nodded, and that was enough. A young woman with pale skin and violet lenses approached them. "Welcome to Memora. Do you have an appointment?" Her tone was polite but impersonal, like a receptionist trained to guard secrets, not welcome guests. "We're here to access our records," Elon replied, his voice calm but firm. "Names: Elon and Justine Musk." The woman froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Justine to catch it. She exchanged a glance with Elon. Something was off. "One moment," the receptionist said, before retreating behind a translucent panel. Within minutes, a man appeared, dressed not in a lab coat, but a charcoal suit. His walk was confident but not hurried. His hair was too perfect, his smile too polished. "I'm Director Feld," he said, extending a hand. "Mr. Musk, Ms. Musk, quite a surprise. We weren't expecting visitors from your classification tier." "Classification tier?" Justine repeated, brow furrowed. "We've made several updates since your last visit. I'd be happy to provide an overview." "We're not here for updates," Elon said. "We're here for access. Full access." Feld's smile didn't falter, but the light behind his eyes shifted. "That might not be advisable. Your sessions fall under an older protocol. We've since sealed several of those records for ethical and technical reasons." "Elon," Justine murmured, placing a hand gently on his arm. She could see the lines deepening around his eyes, the familiar set of his jaw tightening. "Either we see everything," Elon said, "or I walk out and fund a competitor that does." Feld paused, studying them both, as if measuring not their threat, but their resolve. Eventually, he gave a polite bow. "Very well. Follow me." They were led down a quiet corridor, its walls pulsing faintly with embedded circuitry. At the end, a single metal door slid open with a sigh. Inside, the room was small and clinical. 2 seats faced a curved console. A dome-like device hung from the ceiling, casting a soft blue glow. "Sit," said Feld. "This will interface directly with your neural imprint. You'll be able to view your own sessions in third-person playback. But I warn you, it may be unsettling." Justine hesitated. "Why were our files sealed?" Feld didn't answer. He gestured toward the console. They sat. The device descended slightly. A gentle vibration ran through the seats, and then the screen lit up. Static. Then images. Elon, strapped to a recliner, electrodes on his temples. Eyes closed, lips trembling. "I can't lose her," he whispered. "Even if she already left, I can't lose her again." Another scene. Justine awake during her session, crying silently as a technician asked her to describe Elon without using his name. "He's like gravity," she said. "He pulls everything toward him, including me. I just wanted to be somewhere safe, somewhere still." They watched in silence as scene after scene unfolded, memories being prodded, tested, softened. But they never vanished completely. Instead, they lingered like ink on parchment, too deep to erase. Suddenly, the playback stopped. A black screen appeared with red text. "Case, exceptional. Classified under persistent affective memory. Subjects failed to reach full dissociation. Emotional tethers resistant to Protocol 5.4. Below it, a note in a technician's voice. "Despite repeated efforts, both subjects retain affective resonance strong enough to trigger spontaneous recollection. Memories, though fragmented, exhibit regenerative behavior when exposed to emotional stimuli. This is extremely rare." Then came the final line, projected in cold, sterile font. "Recommended classification, unforgettable." Elon leaned forward, reading it again. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Justine's hand found his. "They tried to make us forget," she whispered. "And we couldn't." Feld stepped forward. "You are one of 3 known couples in our history who have resisted full erasure. We didn't expect this level of persistence." "Why didn't you tell us?" Justine asked. "Because," Feld said, "most people want to forget." They don't want to be reminded that love can outlast even science. That's not good business. Elon stood slowly. You don't need to remind us. We already knew. Back outside, the sun was sharper than before, like the world had been dusted clean. They walked without speaking for a while, past the reflecting pools and artificial gardens surrounding Memora Incorporated. At the corner of the lot, a small child chased a soap bubble across the grass. It popped and she laughed. Justine turned to Elon. Do you regret it? Coming here? No, he said. It didn't give us anything new. It just confirmed what we felt. She looked away, then back again. So what now? Elon smiled faintly. Now we live with the things we couldn't erase. And for the first time, the weight between them wasn't sadness. It was something gentler. Something like gravity, yes, but no longer pulling them down. Something holding them in place. The days after their visit to Memora Incorporated felt different, heavier, not in a way that weighed them down, but in a way that made everything more meaningful. Like walking through fog knowing there's a shoreline somewhere ahead. Elon and Justine had stepped into a space that neither of them had names for. It wasn't a clean slate. It was a worn one, filled with smudges of emotion that no machine could erase. For a while, they managed to dance around the tender parts. They focused on routines, midday texts, shared coffees, moments of laughter over old movies they couldn't remember watching but somehow loved in sync. They didn't force the past, nor did they pretend it never existed. It was a strange coexistence of memory and possibility, like speaking a language you thought you had forgotten only to find it singing back in your bones. Then came the Tuesday that changed things. It was a simple afternoon. Elon had invited her to his office to discuss an idea, another of his many ideas. This one involved the development of a satellite network powered entirely by quantum entanglement-based energy bursts. It was wild even by his standards. Justine sat quietly for the first few minutes of his enthusiastic monologue, nodding slowly, twirling a pen between her fingers. Then, somewhere between field stabilization arrays and multidimensional routing, she interrupted. Elon, do you ever stop to wonder if something should stay theoretical? She asked, her tone trying to be light, but fraying at the edges. He paused, surprised. You mean the science or me? The you, she said, her voice brittle now. The way your mind keeps sprinting while everything else struggles to catch up. There was a long silence. I thought you liked that about me, he said, a shadow crossing his face. I did, she replied, but it also scared me. You never knew when to slow down. And now we're doing it again. We're building something fragile, and you're already 10 steps ahead, skipping the foundation. Elon's jaw tightened. He folded his arms, leaning back in his chair. I thought we agreed not to look back. I'm not looking back, she said, rising from her seat. I'm trying to prevent us from landing in the same damn ditch. The tension cracked through the room like dry ice meeting water. It wasn't the content of the argument. It was the familiarity of it. The roles they'd once played were slipping back on like old clothes, and neither of them liked the fit. Then she said it. Maybe there was a reason we chose to be erased. The words hung in the air, trembling. Elon stood still, as if trying to catch their full weight. His face didn't change right away, but his fingers tightened around the edge of the desk, his knuckles whitening. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, even. Or maybe, he said, the mistake was ever believing that true love doesn't hurt. Justine blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. And then, just as suddenly as the anger had come, it broke into something else, tears. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slow unraveling of breath and water. Elon stepped forward, not to comfort her, but because he was crying too. His face contorted the way it only does when pain has been locked up too long and finally finds the door unlatched. They didn't say anything for a while. They just stood there, two people who had once chosen to forget each other, now weeping for the very effort it took to remember what it meant to stay. Eventually, they sat on the couch, side by side, hands close but not touching. I hate that it still hurts, Justine whispered. Elon nodded. Me too. But I don't want it to stop hurting if it means we stop caring. His head turned slightly. That was something he hadn't expected to hear. He looked at her not just with his eyes, but with the depth of someone who had seen her both with and without memory. "Do you think love without pain is even real?" he asked. She took a moment. "I think love without effort is a fantasy, and pain is part of the effort." They breathed in tandem for a while, staring at the skyline outside his office window. Los Angeles looked strangely serene that evening, the smog softening the sun into a muted orange, like the world itself was trying not to shine too brightly. There was a comfort in that. Eventually, she stood. "I need time," she said. "I understand. I'm not leaving. I just need time to process what it means to choose you again." "I'll be here," Elon said, voice low. She smiled just a little, enough to feel human again, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned back. "Next time, just say you miss me. Don't build a quantum satellite." Elon chuckled softly. "Deal." When the door closed, he sat back, letting the silence settle around him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, he felt that uncertainty wasn't the enemy. It was the territory of the brave. And this time, he wasn't trying to erase the map. He was learning to walk it with her, scars and all. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that drifted in quietly, like a forgotten melody. The sun, soft and low, filtered through the tall windows of Elon's study, throwing long, dusty rectangles of light across the floor. Justine wandered the room, while Elon typed absent-mindedly at his computer, the gentle hum of the machine blending into the background like a white noise lullaby. She wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. It was more a mix of curiosity and distraction, her fingers running over the spines of old books, some with cracked leather covers and gold-lettered titles nearly rubbed off. Elon had always kept strange company on his shelves, engineering tomes alongside poetry collections, physics manuals wedged between philosophy texts. One book stood out. It was old, thicker than the rest, with pages slightly warped from age. "Foundations of Quantum Field Theory," it read in faded ink. She pulled it off the shelf gently, a small cloud of dust rising in protest. When she opened the cover, something slipped from the center and fluttered to the floor. A Polaroid, curled at the edges, discolored, fragile. She bent down to pick it up. The moment she touched it, her breath caught in her throat. The image showed her and Elon, years younger, in a makeshift lab that barely resembled anything official. There were wires strewn across the table, beakers stacked in haphazard towers, and streaks of blue paint on both of their faces like war paint from some joyful, forgotten battle. Elon's arm was wrapped around her shoulder. Her head leaned into his, and their smiles were unguarded, unedited, utterly real. Not the smiles you give to cameras, the kind you only give to each other. She turned it over. On the back, in Elon's unmistakably messy scrawl, it read, "You remind me why inventing feels good." Her hands trembled. "Elon," she called softly. He glanced up, saw the photo in her hand, froze. "Where did you find that?" His voice was low, stunned. "In one of your books. Quantum Field Theory. It just fell out." He stood slowly, walked over to her, eyes locked on the photo, as though it were a ghost made real. He took it gently, stared at it for a long while, then let out a slow exhale that trembled slightly. "I thought everything was erased," he said. "That photo shouldn't exist." "It's beautiful," Justine whispered. They sat down together on the edge of the couch. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was reverent. Elon ran his thumb over the surface of the photograph, carefully avoiding the fading ink. "It must have slipped through," he said finally. "The memory wipe, it only covered digitized materials. Anything analog, off-grid, physical, it didn't catch those." Justine leaned closer. "Then maybe this survived because it wasn't part of the system. Or maybe," he said quietly, "some part of us didn't want to let go." She held the photo again, looking at her younger self, that girl with paint on her cheek and light in her eyes. "I barely remember this day," she said, "but I remember how I felt. Safe, curious, alive. He nodded. We built that lab in our garage, remember? Spent 3 nights trying to make a plasma ring for fun. It never worked. But it was the best failure I ever had, she smiled. There was a beat of stillness. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "Can I keep it?" Elon didn't speak. He only nodded once, his eyes still locked on the photograph. She could see that giving it up wasn't easy for him. It wasn't just an image, it was proof. Proof that something once lived between them strong enough to survive deletion. She took the picture gently, holding it like a relic, like it might dissolve under her fingers if she gripped too hard. "You know," she said, looking at him, "this means something." He looked back at her. "It means we mattered." A pause. "Do you think," she asked slowly, "people are meant to forget the worst so they can remember the best?" He tilted his head. "I think people try to forget the pain so they can love again. But the truth is, the pain is part of the love. You don't get one without the other." Justine nodded, wiping a small tear with the back of her hand. They sat for a long while after that. No need for words. The photograph rested on the table between them, an unassuming piece of history, faded but defiant. A survivor. The sun dipped lower, casting orange hues across the floorboards, and a light breeze moved the curtains just enough to make the room feel alive. Elon finally stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with 2 mugs of tea. They sipped quietly, watching the last rays of light disappear from the sky. As dusk folded around them, Justine took a deep breath. "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said. "Understand what? Why we erased it all, and why we came back anyway." Elon looked at her, brows lifted gently. "Because even when we tried to forget," she said, "we couldn't. Not really. Not where it mattered." He smiled then, the rare kind, quiet and real, like the one in the photo. "Maybe love," he said, "is the one thing that refuses to be deleted." She looked down at the image again, ran her fingers across the ink on the back, and whispered, "Then this is our proof." And for the first time in a long while, they weren't afraid of what they remembered, or what they had lost, or even what came next. They simply sat, 2 people no longer erased, beside the photograph that had survived everything. It was just past 7 p.m. when Elon heard the soft buzz of his encrypted terminal. The name, Harland, blinked faintly on the screen. Elon hadn't spoken to the old technician since their last visit to Memora Incorporated, and seeing the message now filled his stomach with a peculiar kind of dread, the kind that comes before a truth you didn't ask for, but suddenly can't ignore. He tapped to open the message. It was brief. "Elon, I found something. A recovery backup. Original timestamp, pre-procedure. Justine's emotional memories, unpurged, undistorted. Call me." Elon sat frozen. For a few moments, he didn't move, didn't breathe. His first instinct was disbelief. Memora was supposed to wipe clean the targeted emotional synapses and archive nothing. But Harland was never the kind of man to bluff. If he said it existed, it did. When he finally called, Harland's voice came through calm and careful. It was stored off-grid, the technician explained. During early beta testing, some sessions were redundantly copied before the final deletion. Most of these were destroyed when they went full public, but a few slipped into cold storage. Yours was one. Elon rubbed his forehead. Justine's memories of me. Specifically, Harland confirmed. Emotional traces, conversations, visual snapshots, even dreams. It's not perfect, but it's intimate. The emotional fidelity is incredibly high, and it's safe to restore, with minimal risk. The memories wouldn't override her current identity. They'd integrate like long-forgotten recollections. A bit of emotional turbulence, maybe, but not damaging. That night, Elon didn't sleep. He sat by his window, watching the night clouds drift like questions without answers. The device, a compact cube of matte black titanium, sat in his palm, barely warm. It contained fragments of Justine's unfiltered affection, fears, doubts, laughter. Her version of them, the untouched truths. What right did he have to give that back to her? She had made a choice. She had walked into that sterile room, signed the waivers, and offered up her pain, in exchange for peace. Even if the memory survived in some ghost file, hadn't she earned the silence? But then again, had she? Over the next few days, Elon carried the device with him, tucked into the inner pocket of his jacket like a relic, like guilt. Sometimes he caught himself fingering the edge of it during meetings, during meals, as if the weight of it could help him decide. One evening, he stood outside her house, device in hand, staring at her door. He didn't knock. Instead, he left a note in the mailbox. "Can I see you tomorrow? Just to talk." The following day, they met at her front porch. Justine wore a loose sweater and held a mug of tea that had long since cooled. Her hair was pinned back messily, and her eyes looked sharper than usual, like she had already sensed something unspoken was coming. Elon sat beside her, holding the cube between his palms like a stone. "I found this," he said softly. Or rather, Harlan did. She looked down at it. No curiosity in her expression, only a quiet tension. "It's the unfiltered version of your memories of me," he continued. "Before the procedure, before you chose to forget." Silence. Justine blinked once, then twice. Her lips pressed into a flat line. "I don't know if it's right to give this to you," Elon said. "I've thought about it over and over. If knowing would help you, or just reopen wounds." She said nothing. "I decided," he hesitated, then reached into his coat and retrieved a small folded note. "I decided it's not my place to make that choice. Only you can decide if remembering is worth it." He placed the device on the porch table next to the note. Then he stood. "I'll go now," he added, voice almost inaudible. "Take your time. Or don't open it at all. That's okay too." That night, Justine sat on her bed, the small cube in one hand, the note in the other. She unfolded Elon's message slowly. "You decide. I already chose to remember you, even without the perfect images." Her throat tightened. The tears came slowly, silent, unforced. Not from sadness, but from the unbearable beauty of being loved in fragments. She looked around her room. The lamp she always forgot to fix. The novel on the floor with a bent cover. The echo of a voice in her mind saying, "You once told me this place feels like a planet unto itself." She didn't know what she would choose. Restoring those memories meant inviting in ghosts, yes, but also sunlight. The laughter she couldn't place. The reason behind her instinct to hum certain songs. The secret behind why her hand always twitched near her necklace when she was nervous. Had he once held it for her? She turned the cube slowly, its surface glinting like obsidian. Maybe she wouldn't open it. Maybe she would. But tonight, she placed it in her nightstand drawer and pulled the blanket around her tightly. Outside, the moon hung low. And somewhere across town, Elon sat alone, wondering whether memories really ever left us or if they simply waited, patiently, like stars behind clouds, for the moment we were ready to see them again. The device sat untouched on the nightstand for 3 days. Justine would glance at occasionally, almost expectantly, like it might speak first. But it remained silent, holding 1,000 possible versions of her past inside, a casing no bigger than a jewelry box. On the 4th day, she placed it back in its case, sealed it, and tucked it into the bottom drawer of her desk. She didn't destroy it. She simply let it rest. That morning, Elon arrived early. No grand plans, no agenda. Just a bag of bagels and 2 mismatched mugs he found in the break room downstairs. She noticed he had written something on a napkin. He handed it to her before saying a word. Written in sharp, unmistakable handwriting were the words, "Every memory we make today competes honorably with the ones we lost. Let's give them a fair fight." Justine read it once, then again, and her eyes glistened, not from pain this time, but from a quiet gratitude that settled like sunlight through a window. "I'm not going to watch it," she said. Elon nodded. "I thought you might not. But I want to do something else." He raised an eyebrow. "I want us to build new memories. Honest ones. Not perfect, but real." There was something in her voice that sounded like resolution, not hesitation. Elon, who had spent decades charting courses through impossible challenges, recognized that kind of certainty and admired it. "I'm in," he said. But on one condition, she added. If someday it hurts too much again if we get lost, let's promise to talk before we delete. Elon smiled. Agreed. No more pulling the emergency lever without a conversation. They didn't announce it to anyone, nor document the agreement in any formal way. But it became the quiet law between them, not just to love, but to stay awake within the love. The next few weeks unfolded like a travel journal with no predetermined stops. They drove along the coast in a second-hand electric SUV Elon bought anonymously. No assistance, no press, just the open road, the scent of salt, and the sound of playlists half forgotten from their youth. In Monterey, they spent a morning sitting at a dockside cafe, writing spontaneous thoughts on napkins. Elon wrote, "The universe expands, and so does my capacity for feeling awkward when you look at me too long." Justine laughed, wrote below it, then stopped looking like a sentient asteroid. He countered with a drawing of a rocket blushing. They kept the napkin. In Santa Cruz, they got caught in a downpour. Instead of running for shelter, they danced. Elon, never much of a dancer, looked utterly ridiculous, arms flailing, feet offbeat. Justine was radiant, hair soaked, laughing so freely it made nearby onlookers smile. A teenager snapped a photo and posted it online with the caption, "Old people in love. Goals." It went mildly viral. Neither of them cared. Each town became a small chapter, a shared sandwich, a missed turn that led to a hidden beach, a disagreement over whether whales could fall in love. Elon argued yes. Justine asked him to build a device to confirm it. There were quiet nights too, evenings where the silence wasn't absence, but companionship. They would sit in the SUV, parked under a canopy of stars, speaking little. Sometimes Elon would gently reach for her hand, not as a question, but as an anchor. And there were setbacks. One morning in a motel room outside Big Sur, Justine found Elon on the balcony, staring out toward the ocean, face tense. "Dreams?" she asked. He nodded. "I keep seeing us in a house that doesn't exist. We're older. There's a dog. I'm fixing a toaster. You're teasing me." She didn't press for details, just leaned into him. "Maybe we can make a version of that," she said softly. "Even with the toaster," he smirked. "Especially with the toaster." Later that day, they visited a local bookstore. Elon found an old paperback on systems theory. Justine picked a poetry collection titled Field Notes for the Soul. Inside the front cover, she wrote, "New memories begin here." Elon wrote his name underneath, like a co-author. At every stop, they took one photo. Not curated, no filters, not even posed. Just moments, caught as they were, raw and beautiful in their imperfection. Elon began keeping them in a small wooden box he carved himself, just big enough to hold 100 images. "Enough for a lifetime, or at least the chapter where we learn how to be human again," he said. There were days they didn't speak much, and that was okay too. The silence between them no longer carried threat, it carried texture. It became clear to both that they weren't trying to return to anything. They weren't chasing lost years or stolen images. They were forging something altogether new, something that didn't rely on memory to have meaning. One evening, camped near the edge of a quiet beach town, Justine looked over at Elon, his face half lit by the dying glow of the fire they'd built. "You really think love can survive without perfect memories?" she asked. Elon looked thoughtful. "I think love is like a solar flare," he said slowly. "It radiates whether we measure it or not. It burns whether we record it or forget it." She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I like that," she whispered. He turned slightly, kissed the top of her head, and said, "So do I. Especially when you remind me of it." And for that night, and the nights that followed, they lived not in flashbacks, not in longing, but in the pulse of now, a space untouched by deletion or regret. Elon Musk, who had bet his entire life on the future of humanity, now bet quietly on the present. And every small human moment with Justine became his boldest experiment yet. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that hummed with the low rhythm of life settled. Elon sat at his desk, the sunlight slanting across his papers in golden bands. The digital screen before him glowed softly with the logo of Memora Incorporated, barely flickering as he reopened the long-archived report. A wave of curiosity had brought him here, not nostalgia, or so he told himself. It had been years since he'd last thought about that place in depth, years since he and Justine had walked out of those pristine white halls vowing to build, not retrieve. The report loaded slowly, the system now archaic by current standards. He tapped through the encrypted files, bypassing layers of permissions with codes he still remembered. The interface felt almost primitive now, compared to the tech he helped design daily. But the words, those clinical, calculated phrases, still held power. He scrolled past summaries and charts until his eye caught a phrase highlighted in muted red. Subjects with intense emotional entanglement display anomalous resistance to procedural memory erasure, notably in subconscious emotional recall and sensory anchors. Elon paused. He read it again, then again. Subconscious emotional recall. It wasn't a poetic line from a novel. It was buried in the language of neuroinformatics, nestled among synaptic pathways and chemical indexes. Yet it described with startling precision what had happened between him and Justine. The way they had found their way back not through logic or shared events, but through quiet flashes of knowing, the scent of a candle, the rhythm of laughter, a sudden unprovoked ache in the chest. He looked up. Across the room, Justine was asleep on the couch, her long legs curled, head tilted, a book slipping from her lap. The light framed her like a memory. Not the pristine version once curated by technology, but the imperfect, breathing kind, soft in its fragility, deep in its truth. The years had touched her gently. He could still see the fire in her, the unpredictable curve of her smile. And beneath the surface in her stillness, he felt it again. That pulse, that frequency that never truly left. He walked over, careful not to wake her. The book had fallen to a page marked in pencil, a quote from a lesser-known philosopher they once debated over dinner. It read, "Love is the continuity of presence, not despite forgetting, but because of it." He smiled. Their story had never been linear. They hadn't walked a clean arc from pain to healing. They had failed, stumbled, hurt each other. They had tried to forget, literally, in ways that bordered on science fiction. And yet here they were. The forgetting hadn't erased the bond. It had simply exposed the parts that were unerasable. He sat beside her, barely making a sound. From his pocket, he pulled out a small glass chip, a relic from Memora, long since decommissioned. On it, only a single encrypted phrase remained. Subject exhibits residual effective flame. Residual effective flame. Elon stared at it. What the engineers had meant clinically, he now understood existentially. Love didn't reside in the orderly files of the brain, waiting to be wiped clean. It lived in the crevices, in the irrational, the inconvenient, the unprogrammed. It sparked in gestures forgotten seconds after they occurred, in glances never quite explained. He thought of the many things he designed, rockets, engines, systems that endured extremes of physics and time. Yet none of them were as persistent as this one flawed, fragile connection. His hand reached for hers, slowly intertwining their fingers. Justine stirred, not fully waking, and leaned into his shoulder. No words passed. None were needed. Outside, the world moved on, quiet winds along the coast, birds tracing invisible lines through the sky. But inside, the room felt timeless. Or rather, finally in sync with time. Not racing ahead, not rewriting the past. Just being. Elon closed his eyes. He no longer needed the chip, the report, the science. He had what mattered. Not perfect recollection, not flawless communication, but a flame that had survived the freeze. Not because it was protected, but because it was real. And real things, he now knew, find ways to remain, even when forgotten, even when erased, especially when loved. If you've made it this far, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from? And tell me, have you ever held on to a memory you thought was gone? Let's talk in the comments.